What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton, and welcome to episode 4 of the Power Company Climbing podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com, where the new website is up and running and functional, and I'm really glad not to have to be building that right now. And special thanks to my friend Yasmin Fowler, who is a coding ninja, essentially, and to my friend Blake Cash for helping me get all of the blog posts reformatted so they didn't look ridiculous and so that the old links still worked, because that's a huge part of it. And thanks to you guys, because traffic's been nonstop and the ebooks are still selling, and I'm psyched for all of it. We're growing here. Nate just put up his first post on the site, and I appreciate Nate's writing because he doesn't ramble and rant like I do. He's very thoughtful and meticulous, and I just tend to type things out in an angry fit and hit post, and I don't really care who I offend, and Nate tries not to offend people, that's a good thing. I'm glad to have that balance. So check Nate's post out. There's going to be a lot more. He's got some columns on the way, regular columns, and I just like his writing, so go check it out. We are also working on a new platform at Power Company Climbing, just to be able to handle more people, because we've been swamped, and it doesn't take much to swamp us because we're only 2 right now, but we're working on that. So if you want to get some training in and all the plans are sold out, keep checking back. Pretty soon we're going to have some new things up there for you. We've also got ebooks, of course, and that's actually what we're here to talk about today. My friend Paul Corsaro and I have been working on a Kettlebells for Climbers training plan that's built specifically to be able to work with your climbing training plan, whatever that may be, if it's one of ours, if it's someone else's, if it's your own concoction, totally fine. We've built it so that it'll work within your training. And I've actually known Paul for 7 or 8 years, I guess. Maybe a little longer than that. Yeah, longer than that. Maybe 10 years ago. Gosh, I don't know. I'm old now. And we met in the Red River Gorge, where he was spending a couple of seasons. I believe he was in college at the time, and luckily he didn't go down the dirt bag path and drop out of school and just become a rock climbing bum. Instead, he continued and got his degree in movement and sports science from Purdue University. He's also now a certified personal trainer, a Strong First Level 1 kettlebell instructor, and he is the strength coach at Scenic City Strength and Fitness in Chattanooga. So if you're in Chatty and you're looking to get strong, Paul's the guy to talk to. He works with a bunch of climbers down there. And if you've ever met Tennessee climbers, you know that they're burly and they're strong. And Paul has something to do with that. So check him out at Scenic City Strength and Fitness if you're in the area. Paul and I sat down in his kitchen actually it was in his dining room, I guess. I don't make those distinctions because I live in a teeny tiny little house and they're all one room and the same for me. But Paul and I sat down in his house over coffee one morning and just chatted about our Kettlebells for Climbers plan. And I like that Paul's kind of a no-nonsense, but also doesn't get too technical. He talks to you like a person. He talks to you about strength culture and lifting as if you're a person and not as if you're a robot who understands every technical aspect of the body and physiology and kinesiology, so you can understand him. And I like that because I'm not interested in being a scientist. I have zero interest in being a scientist. I just want to get strong and I want to go rock climbing. I want to understand why it's happening. And Paul's good at explaining all that. And we actually recorded this maybe the day after, maybe the day before. I don't quite recall. I did my second V10. Paul did his first, Hustle and Flow, down at the Hospital Boulders in Alabama. Shout out to the SEC because they provide they own the Hospital Boulders, which means we own the Hospital Boulders. And I think it's important to shout those guys out for doing what they do for climber access. But anyway, I'm not saying that it was the Kettlebells plan that caused us to climb that, but it might have been. Take it for what you will. Anyway, let's get into this thing.
And it just helps kind of reinforce the idea that strength is a skill.
Okay, so something I'm curious about. Kettlebells are kind of somewhat new to the American fitness culture, in the grand scheme of things anyway. What was your first experience with kettlebells and why were you attracted to them?
So I was it's about 2 or 3 years ago. I was working down here and I just wanted something different. I was doing some barbell work and some dumbbell work and just on a whim bought a book called Simple and Sinister by Pavel Satsulin. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who kind of brought kettlebells over here and started
kind
reading
of an evil Russian genius.
Yeah, the real monotone comrade type of guy. But
comrade.
But so I bought the book and read, and I had taught swings and get-ups before when I was working up in Indianapolis and a little bit down here, and I was really impressed with the simplicity and detail of that book and just how effective that program was, where basically you just do swings and get-ups 5-6 days a week and just not a whole lot of volume, but just I liked the idea of practice and the no-nonsense, and I get thrown off by really complicated programs. It's easy to get off track, and just I love the simplicity of it and started playing around with kettlebells. And
you and everybody else gets thrown off by complex programs.
Oh. But so I started playing around with that. Went to a kettlebell user course in Atlanta taught by the Strong First people. Really liked just some of the techniques they use, a lot of the tension techniques where irradiation, where you're squeezing and getting the shoulders working and getting core tension going just by activating almost every muscle in your body as hard as you can. And that helped press stronger weights, and it seemed to make sense for climbing too. If you can generate more tension, it's more likely you'll stay on the wall and all that. So
you already had your exercise science degree.
Yes.
Is that what your degree is?
Yep.
Exercise science?
Movement and sport science.
Okay.
Yeah,
you already had that degree before you'd ever...
Yes, that's true. And there really wasn't a whole lot of talk about kettlebells and stuff through there. You always saw people kind of moving around the little tiny kettlebells, like the 10, 15-pound ones.
Right.
And it was cool to start playing with some of the bigger ones and realizing that they weren't just a cardio tool. They can be used for building strength in a really effective way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the misnomers about kettlebells. Definitely in my experience, when I first came across kettlebells, it was more CrossFit style, 8 million swings at a time kind of a workout. But I'm definitely finding now that I've been going through this Kettlebells for Climbers program that we're working on, that I'm really liking them as a strength tool. Partly because it just activates your core all the time.
Yep.
More so than a lot of the lifts I grew up with before kettlebells and crazy Russian evil geniuses were here. So are kettlebells the main tool you use now?
Yes, I do mostly kettlebell work. I do some barbell work when I need to load stuff a little bit heavier, but the vast majority of the stuff I do are kettlebells.
Okay. What are the specific exercises you would rather do with a barbell as opposed to kettlebell work? Like what are the things you do with a barbell now?
Honestly, I do barbell deadlifts. And just because you can load it up a little heavier.
Yep.
I use kettlebell deadlifts as a teaching tool to kind of build into that. But once someone's ready, we'll use a barbell deadlift because you can load it more. And when you're going for lower reps, you can work higher weights. So, and kettlebells, there can be big ones, but they can be expensive, and you can't really use them for a whole lot else. If you're buying a kettlebell for purely deadlifts, you could probably get a barbell and get more utility out of that.
Yeah, no doubt. So one of the things I really love about kettlebell training, and this was kind of brought up in my talk with Steve Bechtel on resistance training for climbers, is that the kettlebells don't come in, 2-pound increments.
Right.
You buy a couple of bells and a couple of sizes, and you have to master that lower weight before you move up to the heavier weight. And if you get ambitious and try the heavier weight too soon, it's just not going to let you do it.
No.
Especially with like a get up or anything overhead. And I really love that about it, because you're really mastering the movement pattern instead of just trying to add a half a pound and go up.
And it just helps kind of reinforce the idea that strength is a skill. Like you have to practice every aspect of that skill, and then doing it with maybe not your absolute pure maximum weight, but staying on, your working bell for a good amount of time. You're going to be able to practice some of the finer points of that. And by dialing in your technique, you're just going to get more practice, kind of getting that groove a little deeper and just making it more subconscious in a way where you don't have to consciously think about, all right, now I need to dig my heels into the ground, squeeze my glutes as hard as I can, crush the handle with my hands. It just starts becoming second nature. And then over time, that's going to help you work for a heavier bell, but there's no need to rush it, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know why this is, but for me, kettlebells apply to climbing a little better for me, because I think of climbing movements kind of in terms of a flip book. Like if you take even a single move on a boulder problem, and it can have 4 or 5 small parts to it that are then broken down into even smaller parts. So there might be 10, 12 things to focus on in one single move. Right. And if you take a flip book and you take one page out of the flip book, whatever that action is that's happening doesn't work as well.
Right.
And it's the same way with kettlebell movement. If you take out a small part of it, the rest of it starts to fall apart. And you can notice that pretty easily, which is something that I didn't ever experience lifting like I did in high school or in college. With barbells, or what was popular then was hammer strength machines. You don't get that then. But with kettlebells, I do. Yeah. If I miss a part, I know I missed a part.
And especially I think the perfect example of that is the get up. Like if you rush through a transition stage, like you may not notice the difference right there, but maybe 2 steps later, the bell's going to get a little wobbly, or you're just not. You're going to have to bail and get that bell down safely, however you can, because one of those small subtle details, if you skip over it, it adds up and you can't do it.
Yeah,
it's self-limiting.
Yeah, I really love that about kettlebell work, especially the get up. And I that I just had, and most of the people listening know that I just had shoulder surgery in April, this past April, and I was one of my goals after working out a lot of the summer in Steve Bechtel's gym in Lander was to be able to do a halfway decent get up again fairly soon. And now that I have started doing them and have gotten better and better and better at them, I'm not afraid of overhead work like I might have been had I followed the traditional, lightweight on a machine kind of workouts that a therapist would have me do. Not that I didn't do those things, because I have done them, especially in the beginning stages, but I think it's really important to be able to do something like the Turkish get up and build confidence overhead.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of climbers, even if they haven't had shoulder surgery, just aren't that strong overhead.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I've been lucky enough to work with some pretty strong climbers pretty recently, and I have noticed that their pressing strength overhead is honestly pretty woeful. It's just
Yeah.
not very good. And if you think about it, a lot of us live in that overhead position a lot when we're climbing. And if we're weak up there, could lead to some issues further on. And you see people in the gym doing their shoulder presses and all that. And especially like at climbing gyms now, the shoulder press is a pretty popular exercise. But it's still with a little bit better technique, and maybe you see people do hammering out sets of 10 or so, and maybe with a little bit lower reps, they can work a little bit heavier and work on some of those finer points of, getting the core tight, not flaring out in their ribs when they're pressing and all that, and just a little bit more attention to that, and you get a little bit stronger shoulders and get that press strength up. But that's definitely something I've noticed in climbers is their pressing is not nearly as strong as some of the other movement patterns.
Yeah. How much do you think that mobility plays into that? Because in my experience, climbers have pretty horrible mobility in their shoulders. Probably not as bad as baseball pitchers, but or pitchers have just weird mobility. They're hypermobile in some places and have no mobility in others. But climbers definitely have bad mobility in their shoulders. How much do you think kettlebells can act as some sort of corrective measure in that respect?
Yeah, definitely. One of the guys I follow a lot, he's been a big influence to me. His name's Charlie Weingroff. He's a physical therapist and a strength coach. He's said the best thoracic extension exercise you could do is a heavy press. And climbers, they have that hunch forward posture usually, and thoracic extension is something they could definitely work for. And when done correctly, working on good technique, pressing something overhead, if you don't have any other structural or soft tissue limitations, they can definitely start layering in some stability there and kind of putting some glue or cement into that movement pattern and helping kind of preserve or gain a little bit mobility.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and I've definitely been toying with different things with the kettlebell, like arm bars and
that's a good one too.
Things like that, just to continue working on my shoulder mobility, particularly the one that I injured.
I think it'd be hard to go wrong with arm bars. It'd be hard to go wrong with arm bars, presses, and get-ups when done intelligently, because arm bars get you that rotation or opening up of the shoulder in a more sideways motion. Pressing gets you going overhead, and then get-ups. We've talked a lot about the get-ups, and they're just kind of the best exercise ever. They kind of hit every direction you need for shoulders. And core and hips.
Just recently on my blog, because I put out and I know I've said his name a bunch of times here, but because I put out the episode with Steve Bechtel recently.
I was lucky enough to meet him up at a kettlebell certification this past May, and he's been on Training Beta and your thing, and I wish I had a chance to talk to him more. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, recently on my blog, he answered a couple of questions for some of the readers and listeners, and he noted that he loves get-ups, but he feels they're more of a core movement as opposed to a strength movement until you can do pretty close to half body weight get-ups. And I hadn't really thought of it in those, in terms of that, but I'm definitely in the camp where it's still a core movement for me, and probably will be for a long time. And I think most climbers are probably going to be in that camp as well. However, I definitely think the get up is one of the best core movements that climbers can do. What are your thoughts on core movement versus strength movement, and just why climbers should be doing get ups in general?
Oh, well, yeah, we talked about the shoulder aspect, which is a good one, and the core aspect too. Just being able to keep everything stable and not moving in your core with something heavy overhead while we're moving around under it. So if you think about it, the working arm, well, they're both working arms, but the kettlebell arm is extended, having load. Your other arm in a lot of the positions is extended almost under you, so you're reaching out, you're pressing, and then being able to control that, limit any movement through your core, keeping your spine straight, and then moving your legs under it. If you think about it from a climbing perspective, a lot of times you're trying to keep everything locked down tight in your midsection, pulling with your legs, moving with your arms without trying to move too much to that midsection. So there's some carry over to that, I think. I think one of the best parts about the get up core wise is that first stage, that roll to elbow.
Yeah.
And it teaches you to kind of keep everything straight and long and kind of pivot over that down arm. And especially when you get heavier, you notice this. If you try and do a sit-up, like it just doesn't work. It's a roll to your elbow. And that kind of goes in line with core training should be about resisting movement through your midsection, not creating movement. Your cores are stabilizers first and foremost. And that's why crunches and all that. Well, I think crunches are good for people who have very little fitness histories or backgrounds, just kind of getting them into
the
doing a little bit of work.
Plank, crunch kind of core work.
Yeah. Well, planks are way better than crunches because you're not moving the core. You're doing that same thing. You're keeping everything tight, preventing movement.
Yep.
But so the get-ups are great because you've got a weight overhead. You're working with the down arm. You're moving under it and doing some they can be pretty technical movements, but your midsection's not moving. It's strong and stable, kind of like climbing. Yeah,
something that you just said reminded me of this. So the other coach with the Power Company, Nate Drolet, who also coaches with you at Scenic City Strength and Fitness, who does some coaching work there with you. He said something to me about Jimmy Webb's climbing that was really interesting, and I had never really noticed it, that Jimmy, before he makes moves, puts his body into a position, and he uses his incredible core strength to get into these positions that make the move much easier than it looks for a lot of people. And I've noticed that now that I've watched Jimmy after talking with Nate about it, that he definitely moves his body into static positions from which he can create momentum if he needs it, or he can make the move.
Right.
But his body goes into these positions first. And that's a lot like you're talking about with the get up, that you have to move your body into a position, get tight, and then make the next movement.
Every move sets up the next move. So you can't really take one move out of the get up and work on that. It's all connected.
That's super important.
Which kind of like climbing, you can work moves in isolation on a lot of things, but once you tie it together, they can be a completely different beast. If you've done all the moves on something and then doing it all from the ground in a link, they can be very different feelings.
Yeah, no doubt. One of the other things I really like about the get up is it lets you know how tired you are.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't know it, even if you don't feel the fatigue yet, if your nervous system's tired and you're ignoring that, and you go to do a get up at your normal weight, whatever that is, it's pretty obvious from that first roll up onto your elbow that you're tired.
Yep, that leg will kick up, or you'll get a little bit of wobble in that shoulder, and
you look like a bug on your back trying to stabilize, swinging your limbs around. Yeah, I've done that way too much lately.
It happens for sure. We've all been there. That's for sure.
Yeah, so let's talk about the kettlebell swing, because that's kind of where most people come into contact with the kettlebell first, is through swings. And for me, I really kind of fell in love with the swing because of the powerful nature of that hip extension.
Yeah,
and that feels a lot more like the strength that you need and the power that you need for rock climbing. And I don't think people get that. I think you need to build strength with heavy deadlifts.
Yes.
I love barbell deadlifts, same as you. And you definitely should be doing them as part of your strength program. But I really love the powerful extension you get through swings. And I don't generally ask climbers to try and learn barbell cleans and barbell snatches and the more powerful barbell work, unless they're pretty damned experienced. But the swing is accessible.
It's very accessible, like you mentioned, the Olympic lifts, and a lot of times with the Olympic lifts, you need a lot of wrist and elbow mobility, or pretty strong wrists and elbows, and that's another kind of problem spot for a lot of climbers, is especially wrists. I know my wrists are horrible. I can't really do front squats with the bar or cleans, or just catching it tears my wrists up. But the swing, you just need good, relatively. You don't need extreme hip mobility demands. You just need to be able to move pretty well, and then it's more of a technique thing where you explode through and then hold that isometric plank at the top, which is cool too because a lot of climbing you need to get a little momentum, pop through a foothold or drive, catch the hold, and then hold that isometric contraction to latch the hold. So there's some similarity there. And like you said, the swing's very accessible. It can be learned pretty quickly, and you can just keep playing with that for forever. There's always little things you can focus on. You can do it for strength with lower reps. You can do more conditioning or energy system training with some timed, longer practice sessions with the swing. So there's a lot of utility to it. And that's what I enjoy. That's another thing I really enjoy about kettlebells. You don't need a lot, yet you can do a lot with it. And it just makes things simpler. And
I like that you can progress the swing too from, in a bunch of different ways. You can go from two-handed swings to one-arm swings, and then you can learn to switch hands at the top of the swing, and you're progressing it in a movement skill type way, and then of course you can go into snatches and things like that, which I really love the snatch as well, but I like that you can start off with that two-handed swing. Yeah, and it doesn't. I don't think that works as well with a barbell, especially if you're training by yourself or if you don't have a background in weightlifting culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once you get down to just the barbell deadlift off the ground, the only way you can really progress that safely is add more weight in a smart manner. Like you start cutting rest periods, your form starts getting bad. You start setting yourself up for some trouble. But swings, you can do time progressions. You can do different swing movements. Like I love the one-arm swing, especially for rock climbers, because you get some core trying to fight that rotation.
There's tons of stability happening there. Yeah.
In the shoulder, you get some supplemental grip strength work. A lot of my general population clients, they really get a good forearm burn from a one-arm swing. Obviously, you need a lot more load for climbers because we're a lot more versed in
that's what we do all
getting
day.
pumped. But I think that you get some good grip strength work, even for climbers. It's good to have some sub-max, just practice holding a weight, trying to fly away from you, and controlling it back down and popping it back up with good form.
Yep. That controlling the weight that's flying away from you just reminded me of, I've been doing this, like I said before, this kettlebell for climbers that we've been working on.
Yeah.
And I gave no credit at all, and this is my major mistake, but I gave no credit at all to loaded carries, and you've got me doing them, and I'm really loving these kind of unilateral suitcase and half rack carries with the kettlebell, and all the people who have been up in the engine room when my fiance and I are doing these kettlebell workouts, they've heard me say it 20 times, like, wow, this is way harder than I expect it to be,
They're very sneaky.
And I just love that you can use these things in so many different ways.
Yeah, and it's cool too, because once you get all those components relatively controlled, so you got your swings, get-ups, presses, carries, then we can start playing with it and start kind of tying them together while you go swings, then put it up into the half rack position and walk with it.
Yep.
That just builds time under tension. You're getting some conditioning training, and carries are great for posture and building just total body strength.
Yep.
And what I've found with the complexes too, once you get to that point, you can start tying stuff together. I've had a couple climbers work with me who've commented that being able to do stuff with good form while you're tired and keep the technique down is very similar mentally in a way when you're climbing pumped. A lot of times when you get pumped, your technique gets terrible.
Yeah, the same things are firing in your brain,
just
for sure.
Understanding you're tired, but staying present and focusing on doing the little moves right, doing the subtleties right.
Yep.
And you'll be able to go a lot longer. But we've played with some complexes with some climbers, and they've had some success on some of their more endurance-y routes or stuff that require them to be very precise when tired.
Yeah.
And they attribute that to a lot of the mental familiarity from playing around with those complexes and being able to understand you're tired and, okay, just breathe through it, do the moves, rest when I need to rest. So.
Yep. And let's talk just on a kind of a side tangent here. since we're talking about loaded carries and get-ups and swings and all these different movements you can do with the kettlebell, climbers in particular, and I imagine general population as well, but climbers in particular, because they're so much stronger at pulling, hinging type movements than they are at anything overhead or anything pressing, and you can see that if you've ever watched somebody try a Southern top out, that they just can't press themselves up at all. They might be able to pull V12 and then they have to press themselves up off of one of these nasty slopey top outs and they just can't do it. But at any rate, let's talk about bell choice.
Okay.
For me, I'm finding that I need to skip a bell size, and so kettlebells mostly come in, or at least traditionally they came in kilos instead of pounds.
Yeah, and some of the better kettlebell brands still offer them in the kilos, but they also have the weights on them as well. But,
right.
Yeah, usually 8-ish pound jumps.
Okay.
Are the standard.
Yep. And so for me, it's been better to find my overhead press weight. And you suggested a weight that I could do
about 5 to 8 times.
5 to 8 times, right. And then I need to skip a bell size up and go to the next one for my swings and any of the pulling type work.
And I think that, like you mentioned, just goes towards the climbers' tendencies to be a lot stronger pulling than pushing. And over time, it'd be nice to get those bells a little closer to maybe not the same size, but so we don't have to skip a bell in between. But yeah, definitely to get better adaptations for this program, probably having a heavier bell and a lighter bell for the one bell program would be a way to go. Although if you only have access or means for one bell, definitely go with the press size bell because you're still able to do all the movements and you can still get benefits from lighter swings. And like I mentioned before, the practice or skill element of it and the kind of mental techniques of getting everything to activate right and just doing the skill right will get you benefits regardless of the weight.
Yeah. And I noticed that Pavel, the evil Russian genius, he suggests a specific bell size for men and women that they should be using, and I definitely cannot use his bell suggestion for the overhead work. And I definitely think of myself as
24 kilo, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think so.
One. Yeah.
And I can't use that bell for overhead stuff. And I think of myself as pretty fit, but we are weaklings, comrade, when compared to evil Russian geniuses. So,
and that being said, too, I think that recommendation's more towards people who don't necessarily do what climbers do.
Right. Right.
Climbers, on average, tend to be a little bit smaller than a lot of other strength enthusiasts, and just because it's more to our benefit to be a little bit smaller. And I'm a little bit on the larger side for climbers. I'd feel like I'm around, say, probably 175, 180 right now, and a lot of the stronger climbers are a lot.
Yeah, you're the guy that breaks the holds off of all of our projects.
I try to. But I don't break them because I don't climb hard enough to climb the hard projects. I'd like to eventually, but
yeah, you're right. We're kind of, not only are we lopsided a little in the pushing pulling, or a lot in the pushing pulling, but we're also definitely smaller athletes. So
I'd say a great bell for climbers to work up to have a good size working bell would be the 20 kilo or the 44. I think if you're able to get some presses down with that, good set of 3 or 5, you're in a pretty good place.
Yep. Eventually.
Shoulder pressing wise. Eventually, take your time, build up to it. No one wants a blown out shoulder. It kind of hampers a climbing season when you're hurt.
Yeah. And like you said before, which I think is super important to highlight, is that strength is a skill. So just getting antsy about, I need to have more weight and I need to be using more weight isn't necessarily the way to go. You should get better at using the weight you have.
And you got to think about, too, what are we doing this for? We're not pressing kettlebells or doing Turkish get-ups so we can do a heavier get-up. We're pressing kettlebells and doing get-ups so we can be better rock climbers.
Right.
So as long as you're doing the skill right and getting good technique changes out of it and getting stronger for rock climbing, that's where you're at. If you're trying to press a heavier bell and you hurt yourself and you can't rock climb, you've kind of made some stupid
fail
choices.
number one right there. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't necessarily hate CrossFit, but this is not CrossFit people. Nope. Period.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Like that goes going back to the fatigue thing, where fatigue degrades skill. When you're doing a lot of strength training programs, it's a good idea to rest and give yourself maybe more rest than you think you need, because you want to practice good skill. And if you're tired, inevitably your skill performance is going to suffer a little bit. So that's why, especially when we're playing around with this Kettlebells for Climbers program, we're pretty lenient on the rest. We don't really give you you only have a minute before this next set.
Right.
Take as much time as you need. If your form starts to get a little sloppy, set the bell down, step back, breathe, try and recover a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is a good skill to have too as a climber, being able to know when you need to rest or when you can punch through something, or just being able to rest and get that heart rate back down and
exactly.
And get some juice back.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I'm definitely digging kettlebells. Mm-hmm. Like you, there's going to be barbell work that I'm doing regardless, but I'm loving these kettlebells. And just to kind of recap, and you jump in here too, but the things that I definitely think are great about kettlebells for climbers, or just even for general public, but I really love that you don't have to have tons of implements. Like you can have 2 kettlebells and
you're good for a long
while.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the coolest things, because you're not spending a ton of money. They don't take up a ton of space.
Right. I mean, if you're on a road trip, say if you wanted to, I don't know how your training would be on a road trip, but you could put that in your trunk, take it with you.
Yeah. In fact, probably the first time I ever saw a climber using kettlebells was Pat Goodman years ago in the trunk of his car. He was in the red and he had a kettlebell in the back of his car. And I was just like, this dude is a nut, you know?
That is awesome.
So he and Jessa were both really into them back then. So at any rate, I love that. And it's just cool to move around a big ball of iron.
Everyone likes to swing something heavy around. And
yeah, you feel super cool when you're doing that, and everybody else are doing their TRX workouts.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with TRX. Don't get me wrong. I definitely have people work out on TRX, and I use it myself for a lot of things. So no shade thrown at the TRX people.
There's a lot of right ways to get strong, for sure.
Yeah.
There's no one way and everything else is wrong, for sure. But there's ways certain people enjoy more than others. Like we were talking about, we both like kettlebells a lot. So.
Yep. So I like it for those reasons. I like it that it lets you know that it's a movement skill.
Right.
Where for me, a lot of other weightlifting doesn't do that.
It's ties everything together. You need all of your body to do these movements. Even a swing, where you say it's more of a hamstring or a glute exercise. I mean, your shoulders need to be tight. Your core needs to turn on at the right time. You've got to be able to drive through the ground using your feet. You got to stay tall through your upper body and your head and neck. So it goes to show how movement's not just a muscle here or a muscle there or stuff in isolation. Like everything works together, and it really emphasizes that. And something gets a little out of whack, you can feel it and you know.
Yep. And I don't know why this just popped into my head, but do you think you can ever get too strong for kettlebells? Because I definitely see climbers who've looked at them and thought, that they're not going to be able to use them for that long because they're too badass and too strong.
Yeah, they're wrong.
Yeah.
You can always get stronger. You can always find something to work on. One of the guys another influence of mine, he's a strong first, one of the main strong first guys, a guy named Brett Jones. He said once, I've done a perfect swing once. I'm still trying to find it again.
Yeah.
So there's always little bits and pieces you could practice, or if you're too strong for that kettlebell, try and get a heavier kettlebell, but be careful about it.
Yeah. And that's good to note that, he's done a perfect swing one time, because I definitely have not done a perfect swing. And I feel
Neither
like
have I.
when I'm in there swinging, I feel like I'm still working on tiny little subtleties, which is exactly what I'm doing when I'm when I'm climbing.
Exactly.
When I'm working on a ridiculously hard move that's ridiculously hard for me, then I'm finding, like I said before about the flip book, I'm finding all these little things I need to work on. And it's the same with swings. It's definitely the same with Turkish get-ups. I'm about a million miles away from being able to do a great Turkish get-up, even with a lightweight. So I really appreciate that about working with kettlebells.
There's a lot of similarities, and you can do that. Honestly, you can practice that little aspects of the skill of strength with any exercise modality, really. But
no doubt. You can definitely practice it with anything, but for me, kettlebells seem to highlight it. Yeah. They show me that that's what's wrong.
For sure. And especially we were out bouldering the other day, and little subtle things make a huge difference between making a move feel impossible or being like, oh, this is actually doable and it makes sense. So it's good to have that mental skill to work on the little subtle stuff that maybe you can't see or you can only just barely feel, but those make the biggest difference a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, and I definitely appreciate you working with me on this, kettlebells for climbers plan, and I'm excited to get it out there.
Yeah, me too.
Any closing thoughts for you just on kettlebells in general, or using kettlebells for climbing training, or anything you want to say?
If you're curious, the two movements you probably need to know more than anything else are the swing and the get up. We've talked about those pretty extensively today. If you don't know how to do one, I'd say the biggest thing about swing, it does not go overhead. You swing out and your hips get tall through it.
Yep, and it's more a hinge than a squat.
It is not a squat at all.
Yeah, you don't want to be squatting down to the floor when you do it.
Yeah, we could talk for 2 hours about some of the finer technique details of the swings and get-ups, but if you are unsure about how to do it, find a Strong First or RKC instructor in your area. They seem to do the best job teaching the swing and playing with some of the other aspects of strength, but you can't really go wrong with those two movements for climbing training. They're great for you, so play with them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Play with them. Those are words of wisdom from Paul Corsaro. You should have fun strength training, and it should be a good time, and you should learn about it. So get to it. The program's up. It's out there. I put it up at 12:01 a.m. early this morning, and a couple of you have already bought it. So you're watching. I appreciate that. PowerCompanyClimbing.com. That's where you can find it. Click on the Train With Us tab. Go to the ebooks. You'll find kettlebells for climbers there. It's a 12-week plan meant to work with your climbing training. So get right on it. Also, if you happen to be in the Knoxville area or Tennessee in general and want to come down to Knoxville, Nate and I will be running a couple of workshops at On-Site Climbing Gym on April 22nd and April 23rd. And we're going to be bringing those workshops. We're going to travel with them. Not sure exactly where yet, but we're looking forward to getting those out and about. And hope to see you guys out at your gyms. You can find us on Pinterest. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. No Twitters. We don't tweet. We scream like eagles. See you next time.
It's time